Hello, I'm Chris Barrow with the BBC News. The UN Special Envoy to Sudan has condemned the violence of the past 3 days and said he'd asked both the army and the RSF paramilitary forces to hold a brief ceasefire to allow humanitarian access to civilians. Volker Perthes said more than 180 civilians had been killed and about 1,800 wounded. Ferdinand Amondi was listening.
The UN representative said fighting in Sudan had been nearly uninterrupted since it began on Saturday morning. Mr. Perthes called on the rival factions to respect UN installations, saying its warehouses, guest houses and medical facilities had been shot at and looted, especially in Darfur. While the fighting continues between the army and the RSF, the UN says other tribal forces have begun mobilizing. A second temporary truce agreed on Monday night for medical evacuations was barely honored.
The European Union foreign policy chief has said the EU's ambassador to Sudan was attacked in his home in Khartoum as fighting between rival generals continued. Josep Borrell said the security of diplomatic premises and staff was a primary responsibility of the Sudanese authorities and an obligation under international law. Tunisia's opposition Islamist party Ennahda says its leader has been arrested. Rachid Ghannouchi was reportedly taken from his home in Tunis by the police in the latest move against opponents of President Kais Saied. More from our Arab Affairs editor Sebastian Usher.
Ennahda says that a security squad came for Mr. Ghannouchi late on Monday and took him away to an unknown destination. The party described it as a very dangerous development and called for his immediate release. Ennahda has played a major role in Tunisia's political development since the uprising in 2011. It had the largest number of seats and Mr. Ghannouchi was the speaker until President Kais Saied suspended parliament and assumed executive powers almost 2 years ago.
A grand jury in the American state of Ohio has decided against charging police who shot dead a black man, Jayland Walker, during a traffic stop in Akron last year. The panel said the 8 officers were justified in their use of force. They'd shot Walker 46 times, including 5 times in the back, in a car park he'd run to. Here's Nomia Iqbal.
This is a case that sparked huge protests in Akron last year, and a jury has been processing evidence related to it for a week. This includes looking at the body cam footage police released at the time. They said Jayland Walker had refused to stop when they tried to pull him over for a traffic violation. 40 seconds into the pursuit on road, they say he fired a shot and were worried he'd do it again. Officers then chased him on foot and said he was ignoring commands to stop and show his hands. But Mr. Walker was unarmed when he was fatally shot.
World News from the BBC. Protesters have gathered outside a home in the American state of Missouri, where a black teenager was shot after ringing the wrong doorbell. Lawyers for Ralph Yarl say he was shot in the head and arm by the elderly white homeowner while standing on the doorstep of the suburban house. He'd apparently picked the wrong address after being sent by his mother to collect his younger brothers. 2 residents of New York have appeared in court charged with operating a Chinese secret police station in Manhattan. US prosecutors allege Liu Jinwang and Chen Jinping opened the illegal station last year on behalf of China's Ministry of Public Security to monitor and intimidate dissidents. They've been released on bail. The French President Emmanuel Macron has sought to address the concerns of protesters against an unpopular reform of the pension system by saying he understood their anger. In his first comments since signing the reform into law, Mr. Macron said it was necessary but regretted no consensus had been found.
C'est toute cette colère que de très nombreux Français ont exprimée en manifestant.
It is all this anger that very many French people have expressed by demonstrating, and the vast majority have done so calmly and with respect for our institutions. No one, and especially not I, can remain deaf to this demand for social justice and the renewal of our democratic life, expressed in particular by our youth.
In the television speech, he also promised to restart talks with the unions about better working conditions. Some union leaders said the president had offered nothing substantial. Shares in Google's parent company have fallen sharply following reports the smartphone maker Samsung is considering switching the default search engine on its devices to Bing, a rival owned by Microsoft. Alphabet's market valuation fell by about $50 billion on Monday. It highlights the growing challenge to the world's dominant search engine. BBC News.